A cold autumn wind chased fallen leaves across the schoolyard as Marie Durand hurried to her last class. 23 years of teaching English literature at St. Therese High School had taught her many things, but most importantly, to trust her intuition. And that day, she knew something was wrong. Around the corner of the building, she heard muffled laughter and the sound of a metal surface hitting a metal surface. Marie sped up her pace. 3 high school students surrounded a skinny boy near the dumpsters. She recognized Luca Peterson from the 9th grade, a quiet, withdrawn student who always sat in the last desk. "So, you forgot your lunch money again, nerd?" A tall, blond boy whom Marie recognized as Richard Williams, the captain of the school's football team, taunted. "Do I need to remind you what happens to those who don't pay?" 2 others, Thomas Brown and Peter Holt, pushed Luca against the wall. The boy did not resist, just looked down as if trying to become invisible. "Stop that right now!" Marie's voice cut through the air like a whip. She quickly approached the group, her brown hair blowing in the wind and her green eyes burning with righteous anger. "Get away from him! Now!" The boys recoiled, caught off guard by the teacher's sudden appearance. Richard tried to put an innocent expression on his face. "Miss Durand, we were just talking." "Talking?" Marie interrupted him, coming closer. "I've seen enough, Mr. Williams. You 3, to the principal's office, right now." When the bullies reluctantly left, Marie turned to Luca. The boy was shivering, but not from the cold. His school bag was lying on the ground, his notebook scattered on the wet asphalt. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, helping him pick up his things. Luca nodded without looking up. His hands were shaking as he stuffed the notebooks into his bag. "This isn't the first time?" Marie asked, even though she already knew the answer. Another silent nod. "Listen, Luca." Marie crouched down to be at his eye level. "What they're doing is wrong. You don't have to stand for it. I'm going to help you." For the first time in a while, the boy looked up. His brown eyes showed a complex mix of emotions: fear, distrust, and a tiny spark of hope. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible, and quickly walked toward the school building. The teacher's lounge was filled with the usual end-of-the-day atmosphere. Marie poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at her desk, looking over tomorrow's lesson plans. "Durand's in trouble again," she heard Veronica Pierce, the math teacher, say. This time she was picking on Richard Williams himself. "What happened?" asked Robert Clark, a young physics teacher. "She always defends her favorites. This time she stood up for that strange Peterson." "Oh, that one," Robert said. "I know him. He's a strange guy, always alone, never talks to anyone." Veronica echoed. "And why does she bother? She's just making trouble for herself. He's not just being touched for no reason." Marie gripped her coffee cup tighter. It's typical to blame the victim, to justify the aggressors. How many times had she seen this in her career? At home, while preparing dinner, Marie could not get the events of the day out of her mind. Her small, cozy house, inherited from her parents, seemed especially quiet that evening. An antique clock on the wall ticked away, the only sound that broke the silence. She remembered her brother, Philip, who was also bullied at school. Back then, no one stood up for him. Now he is a successful programmer in Berlin, but the scars from those years are forever. "Never again," Marie whispered, looking at her reflection in the window. "I will not let this happen again." As she went to bed, she felt she had made the right choice. But somewhere deep down she realized that this was only the beginning, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. The next morning, Marie felt a change in the atmosphere as soon as she stepped into the school. In the corridor, her math teacher, Veronica Pierce, turned away defiantly, pretending not to notice her greeting. Near the teacher's office, several high school students, seeing Marie, became quiet and exchanged meaningful glances. "Good morning, Miss Durand," she heard the sweet voice of Peter Holt, one of Luke's bullies from yesterday. His eyes radiated with hidden gloating. Marie nodded in response and headed for her office. She noticed a fresh piece of paper on the bulletin board. Urgent! General meeting of the teaching staff at 15 o'clock. The first lesson was held in a tense atmosphere. The students whispered, giving her sideways glances. Even Elisa Berger, an excellent student who always answered actively in class, was silent today, staring at her textbook. During the break, Olivia White, a young history teacher, approached her. "Marie, did you hear? Richard Williams' parents came to see the principal. His father is a well-known lawyer and they are threatening to file a complaint with the Department of Education." Marie felt her heart skip a beat, but she remained calm on the outside. "What exactly do they want to complain about?" "Bullying," Olivia lowered her voice. "They claim that you publicly humiliated their son and his friends, accused them of something that was false, and their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the internal phone. The principal's secretary said that Marie was being urgently summoned to the principal's office. Robert Blake, the principal of St. Teresa's, was sitting at his massive oak desk when Marie entered the office. Next to him sat an elegantly dressed middle-aged woman, Mrs. Williams, Richard's mother. "Have a seat, Miss Durand," the principal said coldly, pointing to an empty chair. "We have a serious conversation to have." Mrs. Williams immediately went on the offensive. "How could you do this to my son? Richard is an exemplary student, captain of the soccer team. Do you know how much he contributes to the school's reputation?" Marie looked her in the eye calmly. "Mrs. Williams, yesterday I witnessed your son and his friends bullying another student. It was physical and psychological abuse." "Nonsense," Mrs. Williams interrupted. "The boys were just socializing. You've got it all wrong and you've publicly humiliated my son." The principal cleared his throat. "Miss Durand, we have received a formal complaint from 3 families. They accuse you of being prejudiced against their children and of exceeding your authority." "Abuse of power?" Marie asked again. "It is my direct responsibility as a teacher to protect students from bullying." "Listen, Marie," the principal sighed. "You have been working at our school for many years and there have been no problems before. But now you risk creating a serious scandal. Mr. Williams is a powerful lawyer, and if this case goes to the Department of Education, so what?" Marie felt anger boiling in her chest. "Are we supposed to turn a blind eye to bullying just because the bully's parents are connected?" Mrs. Williams stood up abruptly. "I will not allow you to call my son a bully. Mr. Principal, I demand that you take action." The principal rubbed his temples. "Marie, please, let's resolve this peacefully. I suggest you apologize." "An apology?" Marie couldn't believe her ears. "For doing your duty?" "For intervening in a situation that was misunderstood," the director said gently but firmly. "In the future, I advise you not to interfere in conflicts between students. There is a school psychologist and class teachers for this." Marie felt her insides go cold. For 23 years she had believed that she worked in an institution that valued justice and protected the weak. Now this illusion was shattered. "I understand you, Mr. Director," she stood up, "but I will not apologize. If you want to file a complaint with the Department of Education, go ahead." On her way out of the office, she heard Mrs. Williams saying something indignant to the principal. But it didn't matter anymore. In the corridor, Marie met the eyes of Luke, who seemed to have heard and understood everything. In his eyes, she saw the same thing she felt: loneliness in the fight against a system that protects the strong and ignores the weak. Returning home that evening, Marie thought about how many other Lukes like him suffer in silence, afraid to speak up, knowing that the system is not on their side. And for the first time in many years, she doubted whether she could change anything in this system. For 3 days. For 3 long days, Luca's desk remained empty. Marie noticed it out of the corner of her eye every time she entered the classroom, and each time her heart sank with anxiety. She tried to find out the reason for his absence, but the class teacher just shrugged her shoulders. Illness, his parents said. It was nothing special. But Marie felt that something was wrong. After the incident with Richard and his company, after the conversation with the principal, had Luca really given up? Had the system won again? On the fourth day, when she had almost lost hope, Luca showed up. Something had changed in him. Perhaps it was his posture. He was no longer hunched over, trying to be invisible. Perhaps his eyes were direct and focused, not downcast. Or maybe it was some kind of inner confidence that shone through the usual silence. The lesson was dedicated to Romeo and Juliet. Marie talked about the conflict between generations, about how prejudice and hatred can poison the lives of entire families. Who can say why the young Montagues and Capulets continued their parents' feud? She asked the class. And suddenly, the unthinkable happened. Luca raised his hand. The class fell silent. Everyone was used to him not speaking in class. Yes, Luca? Marie tried to hide her surprise. The boy stood up and his voice, quiet but clear, filled the classroom. I think it's not just that they imitated their parents. When you live in an environment where hatred is considered the norm, where you are taught from childhood that certain people are your enemies, you start to believe it. It's like a vicious circle. You hate because you've been taught to hate, and others hate you back. And only someone who has the courage to say no can break this circle. The class was frozen. Even Richard Williams, who usually poked fun at everything Luke said, was silent, amazed at the depth of his answer. Very good, Luke. Marie felt herself overwhelmed with pride. This is a very profound observation. After the bell rang, when the other students had already left the classroom, Luca came to her desk. His hands shook slightly, but his gaze was firm. Mr. Rand. He was silent for a moment, searching for words. Thank you. You are the first person to stand up for me. Marie felt something tighten in her chest. Luca, this is... No, please, let me finish. He took a deep breath. You know, all these years I thought there was something wrong with me, that I deserved the way I was treated. But when you intervened that day, I realized it wasn't true. His voice trembled. I didn't stay away from school those 3 days because I was sick. I was thinking. I thought a lot. About myself, about others, about everything that was happening. And I decided that I would not be silent anymore. This is a very brave decision, Marie said gently. I know that not everything will change overnight, Luke smiled weakly. But I'm not afraid anymore. And I wanted you to know that you changed my life that day. Marie felt tears coming to her eyes. She remembered the conversation with the principal, the threats from Richard's parents, the cold stares from her colleagues, and she realized that everything was not in vain. You know, Luca, she said, sometimes the greatest courage is just being yourself, and you showed that courage today. He nodded and started for the door, but stopped at the threshold. Mr. Rand? Yes? What I said about Romeo and Juliet, I've been thinking about it all these days. And you know what? Sometimes it only takes one person to break the circle of hatred. Just one person. When he left, Marie sat at the table for a long time, looking out the window. The first snow was falling behind the glass, covering the schoolyard with a white blanket. Everything changes, she thought. Even the things that seem eternal and unchanging. You just have to believe and not be afraid to take the first step. Chapter 4. An unexpected encounter. It was a cold evening. Marie was sitting in her favorite chair checking her students' work when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Hello? She answered, putting down her red pen. Good evening. Is this Mr. Rand? The woman's voice sounded confident and soft at the same time. My name is Sophia Peterson. I am Luca's mother. Marie straightened up in her chair. Yes, I'm listening. I'm sorry to call you so late, but could we meet? It's important. An hour later, they were sitting in a cozy coffee shop near the school. Sophia Peterson was an elegant woman of about 45, with the same brown eyes as Luca's. Early gray hair glimmered in her dark hair, and her eyes showed the fatigue of a person carrying a heavy burden. Coffee for the ladies. The waitress placed 2 cups in front of them. Sophia wrapped her thin fingers around her cup. You know, Miss Durand, please, call me Marie. Marie? Sophia paused. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Luca. I was just doing my job. No, Sophia shook her head. What you did went far beyond the call of duty. You gave me my son back. Her voice trembled. After the death of Thomas, his father, Luke changed. He withdrew into himself. I tried to help, but she smiled bitterly. I was broken myself. The only thing that kept me afloat was my job. I plunged into it, became the company's executive director, and spent 14 hours a day at work. Marie listened in silence, realizing that Sophia needed to talk. And Luca? He looked so much like his father. The same eyes, the same smile. Sometimes it hurt me to even look at him. And I distanced myself. I thought I was providing him with a future by earning money, but in reality, I was losing the most precious thing I had left. Sophia took a tissue from her purse and blotted her eyes. But 3 days ago, something changed. Luca came home from school different. He was talking. For the first time in a long time, he talked about his day, about his literature class, about how you stood up for him. And you know what? She looked Marie straight in the eye. I saw him smile, for the first time in 2 years. Luca is a very smart and sensitive boy, Marie said quietly. He just needs support. Yes, Sophia nodded. And you gave him that support. You know, I made inquiries. I found out about the situation at school, the pressure from other parents, the threats. Marie tensed, but Sophia raised her hand. No, I'm not here to add to your problems. On the contrary, I just wanted you to know that what you've done for my son is priceless. Outside the cafe, snow was falling, covering the city in a white blanket. Marie felt a lump in her throat. You know what's most important? That Luca believed in himself, that he is no longer afraid to be himself. And all this is thanks to you, Sophia smiled softly. You didn't just protect him that day. You showed him that there is justice in the world, that there are people who are ready to defend the truth. As they were saying goodbye at the exit of the coffee shop, Sophia suddenly hugged Marie. Thank you, for my son, for not passing by. Marie walked home, letting the snowflakes melt on her face. The conversation with Sophia warmed her heart. She saw that her action had really changed someone's life for the better. And that was the best reward. A week after their first meeting, Sophia invited Marie for coffee again. This time she seemed more focused and determined. I thought a lot after our conversation, Sophia began as they sat down at the same table, about education, about children, about how often the system fails those who need protection the most. Marie nodded, waiting for her to continue. You see, our company is expanding. Sophia took a sip of coffee. We're opening a new area, educational consulting for corporate clients, and I need a person who not only knows the theory, but has real experience in dealing with difficult situations. Are you offering me a job? Marie raised her eyebrows in surprise. Yes, the position of an educational consultant. You would help companies create healthy work environments, conduct bullying prevention training, teach managers how to recognize toxic situations and respond to them appropriately. Marie thought about it. She loved teaching, she loved her students, but recent events had shown how limited her options were within the school system. What about the children? She asked. What about Luca? Sophia smiled softly. Do you know what Luca said to me yesterday? Mom, Miss Duran taught me the most important thing, that the truth is stronger than fear. At that moment, a group of school children walked into the coffee shop. Marie recognized Luca among them. He was talking animatedly with his classmates, and he had a confident smile on his face. When he noticed them, he waved his hand in greeting. See? Sophia followed her gaze. He's not a victim anymore. You showed him how to be strong. What does the school think about this? Marie asked. Oh, Sophia smiled slyly. After a few influential parents expressed concern about the school's anti-bullying policy, the principal suddenly became very interested in creating a new anti-bullying program. Veronica Pierce even apologized to Luke for turning a blind eye to the bullying. Marie shook her head. It's amazing how quickly things can change. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Sophia leaned forward. You know how to change things for the better. Imagine how much good you can do by working with adults who will then influence hundreds of other people. Marie looked out the window where the snow was falling. Somewhere out there, in the white swirl, her future was hiding. I'll think about your offer, she finally said. Of course. Sophia put her business card on the table. You know where to find me. Marie quit her job a week after Sophie's offer. 6 months had passed. The spring sun was shining into the spacious downtown office where Marie was preparing for another training session. Her safe space program had become popular with corporate clients. She taught managers and employees how to recognize the signs of bullying, respond to conflict situations, and create a healthy team atmosphere. On the way to the conference room, she met Sophia. How are you? She asked, beaming with pleasure. I heard that your last project at the medical clinic was a huge success. Yes, Marie nodded. You know, it turns out that even adult professionals have the same problems as school children. They just hide it better. Sometimes she went to St. Teresa's school. Luca was now the head of the school's debate club, and his story inspired the administration to create a special support program for students facing bullying. At home, Marie has also seen changes. Her new salary allowed her to renovate her old house, turning it into a cozy nest. The living room now had a new bookshelf filled with specialized literature on psychology and pedagogy, and a small gazebo appeared in the garden where she liked to work on warm days. But the most important changes took place in her heart. Now she knew for sure. Sometimes you just have to step forward, stand up for someone who needs it. And then the world begins to change, in small steps, but steadily. The conference room door opened. Marie took a deep breath and entered, ready to share her experience and wisdom again. A new audience, new stories, and new opportunities to make this world a little better awaited her.